She looks like a queen, not because of jewelry, not because of cameras, but because of what people believed happened when she spoke. For years, the world watched the man at the podium, the slogans, the defiance, the speeches aimed at the outside world. But inside the system, inside the regime, investigators and political insiders have long argued that power did not move in only one direction. It moved through networks, through loyalists, through legal architecture, through the kind of strategy that rarely appears in photographs. And that is where her name appears. Not as a decorative figure, not as a ceremonial spouse, but as an operator, a strategist, a legal mind. Tonight, that image collides with a reality that is brutally simple: a cold cell, a controlled schedule, and the authority of the United States federal court system. The woman once described as the queen behind the throne is now held inside a federal detention facility in Brooklyn, New York, under strict supervision inside the same system that now holds her husband. This report is not a love story. It is not a gossip piece. It is a power story. And it begins with a question that investigators, historians, and ordinary citizens have asked for years. Was she merely the spouse of a powerful leader, or the strategist who helped design the machinery that kept that power alive? To understand how someone reaches the peak of influence, you have to begin before the crown, before the titles, before the motorcades. You begin with skill. And in her case, the skill was law. She was trained as a criminal defense attorney, someone fluent in pressure, leverage, and the careful selection of words. In ordinary life, that can mean courtroom victories. In politics, inside a movement struggling for control, that can mean something far larger. It can mean survival. Because regimes are not protected only by soldiers. They are protected by narratives, legal shields, institutional redesign, and the ability to neutralize threats before they become public. A strategist understands that a legal strategist builds systems around it. Over time, she earned a reputation inside the movement described as disciplined, calculating, and effective. Someone who could structure deals, someone who could manage internal disputes, someone who could turn legal complexity into political advantage. And then in the 1990s, as the political environment shifted, her influence reportedly became more visible to those paying attention. Not always to the public, but to the inner circle. She did not simply appear beside power. She moved toward it. Historical records and political timelines describe her as a figure of rising institutional importance long before her husband became the dominant face of the project. She wasn't merely present in meetings. She was often described as shaping outcomes. That matters because political movements, especially in periods of unrest, become ecosystems. They reward loyalty. They punish hesitation. They elevate those who can secure support and defend the project against legal or political collapse. If you can win courtroom battles, manage sensitive cases, and keep the movement's people protected, you become indispensable. And that is how strategy becomes power. By the early 2000s, she begins moving through formal political roles, positions that do not belong to spectators. These are roles that come with control over committees, influence over institutional direction, and the ability to shape the rules that govern everyone else. The timeline described in this narrative points to her election into national office, followed by re-election, and then a historic milestone: becoming the first woman to preside over the country's national legislative body. For supporters, that was progress. For critics, it was consolidation. For the inner circle, it was a signal. She was not a background figure. She had entered the core, and once someone reaches that level, the power they hold is not just a title. It's access. It's coordination. It's the ability to decide which laws move, which investigations stall, which reforms pass, and which doors open only for loyalists. At the same time, her husband's profile rises through the movement. But what makes this story different is how often the narrative places her not behind him, but beside him, sometimes even ahead of him in institutional stature early on. That is where the phrase "queen behind the throne" is born. Not because she wanted a crown, but because people around the system believed she was a strategic center of gravity, someone who could negotiate alliances, someone who could quiet internal conflict, someone who could interpret threats, international sanctions, defectors, criminal allegations, internal plots, and respond with strategy rather than emotion. Then comes the public symbolism. In July 2013, according to the timeline referenced in the original script, their union is formalized under the law. To the public, it's a marriage headline. But in a political ecosystem, a formal union can also function as a fusion of networks. Because power isn't only about who you are, it's about who is connected to you. Who moves when you move? Who stands when you stand? Who falls when you fall? From that point forward, she appears at official acts, ceremonies, and the political theater that signals continuity. For years, she is present as the regime's image and message evolves. And then the final pivot arrives. Not gradually, not politely, not symbolically. It arrives as an operation. Targets secured, area clear, repeat, area clear. Those words change the genre of the story because now this is not politics. This is custody. This is enforcement. This is the moment where the person who once shaped law is placed under the authority of law. According to the narrative you provided, the operation takes place inside a heavily guarded residence. Security rings, loyal protectors, a system designed to prevent surprises. But the raid, as described, catches even the most loyal security by surprise. And within hours, both are moved, transferred to the United States to face charges in New York. This is not a minor detail. The Southern District of New York is one of the most aggressive and experienced federal jurisdictions for complex cases involving international crime, financial networks, and cross-border conspiracies. When cases land there, the implication is serious. The government believes it can build jurisdiction, evidence, and a narrative strong enough to survive the fight. Now we move into the legal architecture because this is where many viewers misunderstand what they're watching. When a federal case begins, the public sees one moment, a hearing, a headline, a plea. But the real battle happens through structure. Charges are selected to establish jurisdiction. Conspiracy frameworks are used to connect actions across time and geography. Evidence is organized into a story the court can accept. And the accused, especially high-profile political figures, become part of a system that is designed to reduce them to procedure. Name, defendant, case number, detention status, restrictions, court dates. In that system, a former First Lady is not treated as a symbol. She is treated as a risk profile. Flight risk, security risk, potential witness interference, political sensitivity. That is why the detention conditions become part of the story. She is now held in a federal facility in Brooklyn, described as the same prison where her husband is housed. Whatever the specific unit, whatever the internal classification, the principle is the same. Her life is now scheduled by others. Wake-up times, movement windows, meal procedures, count times, restrictions on phone access, rules for contact with counsel, rules for medical treatment. And when you go from commanding rooms to asking permission for movement, that transition becomes not only physical, it becomes psychological. Because power is addictive in a quiet way. It teaches you that doors open, that people wait, that your voice changes outcomes. Detention teaches you the opposite, that doors do not open unless the system allows it, that your voice is recorded, monitored, and limited, that your world shrinks into approved steps. Details about her current state are described as scarce, restricted by prison protocols. But the script emphasizes constant surveillance and strict controls. And then another layer enters a public court appearance. International media documented her appearance in federal court. And the defense, according to the narrative, claims she suffered injuries during capture. They demand a full medical evaluation. In a case like this, the medical claim is not only human, it is legal. Because conditions of arrest can become arguments, treatment can become motions. Medical evaluations can affect detention decisions. And detention decisions can become leverage on both sides. Prosecutors may argue risk and seriousness. Defense may argue humane treatment, due process, and the need for conditions that allow proper preparation. Then comes the plea. Both the leader and his wife plead not guilty. That moment is often misunderstood by the public. A not guilty plea is not a declaration of innocence in a documentary sense. It is the standard opening position in adversarial court. It triggers the process: discovery, motions, suppression arguments, challenges to jurisdiction, and negotiations. And the charges described in your narrative are severe. International narco-terrorism conspiracy, allegations of coordinating the movement or importation of illegal substances, and other charges linked to organized crime. This is where the stakes become enormous, because these charges do not carry only prison time. They carry political shockwaves. They communicate that the case is being framed not as corruption, not as mismanagement, but as a form of international criminal enterprise. That framing is powerful because it affects public perception, diplomatic reactions, and the willingness of partners to engage. Now, consider the contrast the camera cannot fully capture. A woman once presented as a symbol of state dignity appears in a controlled courtroom environment, dressed in detainee clothing, under guard, within a room governed by federal procedure. No special protocol, no ceremonial immunity, no state anthem, no grand entrance, only a judge, only the record, only the law. Her defense speaks, the prosecution speaks, and the court decides what happens next. That is the mechanism, and it is intentionally impersonal. But to understand why this moment resonates, you have to return to the long arc of influence, because the narrative insists her power did not begin as a spouse. It began as an architect, as an early collaborator within the movement, as a legal defender for key actors, as someone entrusted with sensitive tasks and strategic decisions. The script references her defending rebellious military figures in the 1990s. It references her managing legal teams to protect leadership. It references her appointment to major government roles, including chief legal positions. Whether each detail is later debated in court or in public discourse, the story being told is consistent. She was close to the core for decades. And when someone is close to the core for decades, they shape outcomes even if they never speak publicly. They control access. They control appointments. They control which factions survive. They control which rivals are neutralized. That is why, for critics, she becomes a symbol of consolidation. For supporters, a symbol of loyalty. For investigators, a symbol of coordination. From 2013 onward, her presence becomes routine in official acts. She appears as a stabilizing image. Even during election cycles, she is portrayed as active. The script references participation in the 2024 campaign environment. And then the capture. Today, reality is different. That line lands because it's simple and because it's true in one fundamental way. A person who once shaped the state is now subject to another state's legal machine. And that machine does not operate on emotion. It operates on filings, deadlines, evidence, detention orders, security protocols. Now, the geopolitical layer, cases like this are not contained inside court walls. They influence negotiations. They affect sanction strategies. They shift internal power balances back home. Because in any regime, when a central figure is removed, a vacuum forms. Others compete to fill it. Some factions panic. Some factions defect. Some factions become more brutal to prove loyalty. And outside that country, international actors interpret the case as a signal. Is enforcement expanding? Is there a new legal posture? Is this case a warning? Is it a bargaining chip? Different audiences see different meanings. Supporters may frame it as political persecution, an attack on sovereignty. Opponents may frame it as accountability, long overdue consequences. Neutral observers may see it as a test of jurisdiction and evidence. But for the accused, none of those narratives changes the immediate reality. They wake up in custody. They eat under rule. They speak under limitation. They wait for court. And this is where the human dimension becomes unavoidable, because power changes the way you perceive time. When you are at the top, time belongs to you. Meetings happen when you choose. You can delay consequences. You can postpone uncomfortable questions. Detention does the opposite. Time becomes a cage. You wait for a hearing. You wait for a lawyer visit. You wait for a judge's calendar. You wait for paperwork to move. Even your body becomes part of procedure, medical requests, approvals, escorts, documentation. When the script says there are no thrones and no state protocols protecting her, it is not simply poetic. It is procedural. In the federal system, the protocol is the law, and the law is executed through routine. Now, what happens next? In cases like this, there are predictable stages, regardless of how political the story feels. Pretrial detention decisions, discovery disputes, motions challenging evidence and jurisdiction, negotiation possibilities, trial preparation. If the case moves forward, the story becomes slow and technical, and that is often where public attention fades. But for the accused, that slow technical grind is everything, because every motion matters. Every piece of evidence matters. Every argument matters. And the court record becomes the only reality that counts. This is why the transformation is historic. Not because she was famous, not because she was photographed, but because she is being processed through a system that is designed to treat influence as irrelevant. It doesn't matter who you were, it matters what the government can prove, what the defense can challenge, what the judge can accept. That is the hard edge of the story. And so we return to the opening image, a woman who looked like a queen because people believed she could bend outcomes. Tonight, she cannot bend the schedule. She cannot bend the security rules. She cannot bend the calendar of federal court. She can only fight within it. The legal process will decide what comes next for the detained couple. And the result will echo beyond the courtroom into diplomacy, into domestic politics, into the history of a nation that has lived through years of crisis and polarization. We will continue tracking developments as filings, hearings, and decisions unfold. Thank you for following this detailed report on the crisis in our region. If you want more updates, like this video, subscribe, and stay with us.